this is Lauren Chen here for Anthony Lunsford. I heard about your new fictional novel putting a little bit of common sense back into the idea of men competing in women's sports. The book is called Transgender Hoops, Identify as Female. Go please read the reviews on Amazon. This is such a strange issue that we're even talking about it, but no, women's sports is not co-ed, so I'm glad there's a new book out that's kind of touching upon this issue, which seems to be everywhere on the news now.
We're also wondering how you view the whole trans athlete issue, because that's something that we've seen come up a lot in the news, different events. Now it's actually come to the point where different governing bodies for sports events and even potentially U.S. Congress, they're planning on taking action to do something. How do you view that? Because that's not the easiest thing to talk about if you want to, be true to biology, but also, be fair and compassionate toward people who are trans. So how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have trouble navigating, like you said, the compassion and the biological reality aspect.
Yeah.
I think in terms of sports and when you are, first of all, I'm not an athletic person. I don't know a lot about sports. So when it comes to rules and regulations, don't ask me. However, I will say it doesn't take someone who's extremely knowledgeable about sports and athleticism to know that, like, if you transition at 30 and then you join a football team, like,
yeah,
a powder puff football team, you know what I mean? It's not going to be the same as if you were a biological woman. I think that in terms of, for example, say a trans woman is joining a female-only team, I think one of the best things to do is to look at how early that person transitioned, because even though I have made it so clear in the past, I think we talked about it last time, that I don't support children transitioning, that doesn't change the fact that they do. And so I think if you transition before puberty, you're going to develop completely as a normal female, and so I think that's fine. But I think any later than that, I think that, and it's a hard thing to say, I think that possibly the best answer is having separate leagues for trans people. I know that that's not always the most popular opinion because you get the whole like separate but not equal thing. But in reality, if you're talking about physicality, there isn't really equality. So I kind of throw the equality thing out the window, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's, I've heard people on Twitter suggest the same thing, and that's kind of where I lean towards, because on the one hand, you don't want to say trans athletes, I'm sorry, you just can't compete ever, because, that sucks. But on the other, especially when you have, it's maybe not as big of a deal when you're talking about female to male athletes, but definitely when it's male to female.
So I have to start off this whole trans sports thing with some transparency about where I am coming from, which is the perspective of not knowing anything about sports. I have never been into sports. I'm the kind of person that in social settings, when sports references are made, they go right over my tranny head. I have no clue. So that had to be said, I feel like, for me to do this video. So probably the most famous transgender athlete on a high level is Fallon Fox from the MMA. Just learned that acronym. So feast your eyes on this video of Fallon Fox taking her opponent down in 39 seconds.
These girls are getting right into it. Fox to the knees, and that's it. Fallon Fox.
It was also reported in a fight after that she broke her opponent's skull. Broke the skull. This happened in the first round, in the first 2 minutes. She literally walked on stage, broke her skull, and won. And I'm sorry, but you'd have to be a complete idiot to think that Fallon Fox does not have at least somewhat, like maybe you don't want to go all the way, but at least somewhat of a biological advantage over her opponent. Hormones or not, surgeries or not, Fallon Fox actually transitioned late into her adulthood, which means she went through an entire male puberty, developed entirely male, and then transitioned. So when it comes to things like bone structure, which are irreversible in transition, we're talking wrist size, hand size, finger size, elbow size, joint size. They're all thicker than her biological female opponents. Now, obviously, when it comes to fighting, the size of those things are very, very important to fighting and hitting someone. I like to think my hands aren't that big, but this isn't about me. Okay. And this issue of trans people in sports is not secluded to just professional sports. It is also affecting high schools. Check out this mini documentary from a high school in Connecticut.
A transgender high school athlete who is biologically a male took first place in both the 100 and 200 meter dash at Connecticut's Girls Track and Field State Championships.
When I'm at the start of the race, when I'm lining up and getting into my blocks, everyone already knows the outcome. Those two athletes are going to come 1 and 2, and everyone knows it. No one thinks it's fair because we all know that males are physically stronger than females and they compete at a higher level.
For, like she said, everyone to go into it already knowing the outcome, to me is a problem. In my opinion, and this is me setting aside every bit of bias that I may or may not have as a trans woman myself, it seems to me that the titles that these young girls are working so hard for are being taken, and it's really not fair. So here is a
Tell us a little bit, just a little bit, no spoilers too many here, about the book.
Okay. Well, it's so hard to avoid getting into it, but here's how it goes. The story's about 9 guys, high school boys, that are basically get put in a bad situation by abusive coaches. And I know you've got a kid that plays hockey, so if you've either had at some point in your life a bad coach or you've seen them in action on other teams, and us as parents, it's so hurtful and it makes you so angry. So you get to see what happens, and that's kind of what sparks this whole story. It was written really as a fictional sports novel to get your interest into it, and that's what happens in the story. That's what sparks it. These poor boys have no chance of going to college. They had these great college dreams of playing sports and earning a scholarship. Without that scholarship, they have no chance of going to college. So in rolls into the story two gentlemen that kind of transform and changed these young men's lives, not in a good way for them, but not in a good way for the rest of the world. And what happens is they find a loophole in the system. And we all know what that loophole is. It's that blind political correctness that enables you to, in 1 second, be able to say, I choose to identify as a female, and now I'm allowed to play in women's sports. I'm allowed to play against girls the next day without taking any hormones, without doing any kind of surgeries, without seeing anyone. You just selectively do it. And that's what sparks the story. These 9 boys have an event that pulls them together from 4 different high schools here in Cincinnati. I won't mess that up. You got to read it to get it. But and they move on and they have great success, and they use, as bad as it is, they end up using that political correctness and that identifying as female as like a force field for them. They're untouchable because everybody knows that the PC sledgehammer will come down on you hard if you buck up against them. So they take advantage of that. Story goes on, and you're really going to have to read it. But the end of the story is that point to where realization hits, and that gut check. And it'll be that gut check for every reader that reads the book about, what have I done? Basically, in the process of doing this to help 9 boys, I've burned Title IX to the ground. I've destroyed women's sports. That's over. So that's kind of, I guess, the little spoiler alert part. That's kind of short version.
Reality.
Yeah.
Reality. We have almost half the states now letting children do this, identify as